Ahmed. I welcome you on behalf of the President and the Executive Committee of the chapter to the webinar conducted by CA Sri Lanka chapter of Western Region KSA. For today's session, we have CA members joining us from Sri Lanka, UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Riyadh, and Dammam KSA. We also have members of other accounting bodies and colleagues from other professional bodies participating. I thank you all on behalf of the chapter for accepting our invitation and joining with us today. CA Sri Lanka members, please type in your name and membership number in the chat box. Today, we have invited an expert in the subject of strategy and management accounting to enlighten our members and the colleagues from our fraternity on the subject of strategizing management accounting. Our panelist today is Professor Chandana Alawathage. Professor Alawathage is currently a professor in accounting at University of Glasgow. Before that, he was the chair in accounting at the University of Aberdeen Business School. He is experienced in teaching and researching accounting subjects for over 20 years. He is internationally known as critical accounting scholar through his publications in leading accounting journals. He is the author of 2 strategic management accounting textbooks, one, Management Accounting, Change, Approach, and Perspective, and the other, Strategizing Management Accounting, Liberal Origins and Neoliberal Trends. Professor, over to you.
Thank Usman. Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me well? I guess so.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Yes, Professor, you are loud and clear.
So thank you very much for inviting for this lecture. It would have been better if I could deliver this lecture real time on a real place, but anyway, Zoom seems to be much better because we don't have to travel anyway. So today I'm going to talk about strategizing management accounting, liberal logic and neoliberal transformations. So basically, what I'm trying to do is to have a brief historical discussion on why and how management accounting evolved, and then specifically in the contemporary world, what is management accounting, how it has been transformed, and what new roles that the management accounting has to play. So therefore, basically, I divided my presentation today into 3 key themes. The first one is the liberal logic of management accounting. And second one is, during the last 20 or 30 years, how management accounting, together with other management disciplines, together with financial accounting, auditing, and everything together, transformed into a different kind of discipline, which is basically concentrating on putting the life into circulation. I will explain what I mean by that later on. And then I will also talk about the third theme, neoliberal role of accounting. What now accounting has to do in this contemporary world. The accounting is no more simply carrying out, reporting function. It is more than that. It has to enable and enact the competition. It has to enable and enact the markets. So I will talk about that. So these are the key themes, 3 themes around which my discussion, my talk today will be organized. Okay, so let's start with liberal origins. So as you all know, management accounting, together with all other disciplines, such as financial accounting, auditing, law, psychology, psychiatry, medicine, started during the Industrial Revolution, during the period of modernity. So the term modernity is a particular period. So that is the period in which the world, especially the Europe, transformed from feudal, pre-modern world to the modern world. There were 2 very specific, historically important events taken place in the Europe. One is what we call the French Revolution. French Revolution is a historically important, very critical event. That is because it is the first time in the world a state, a government came into being without the support of the church, without the support of the religious institution. So it is the first non-religious state. Now, as soon as this non-religious state is being formed, so the governors, the rulers, so the king was replaced by, president, prime ministers, and all this cabinet and that sort of institution. So as soon as you have governors, politicians, ministers, and so on, instead of the king, then there is a problem of power. How these governors, how these politicians command the people. The king could command the people because traditionally people thought that king is the God's blood. So the king has the divine power. And king has the support of the church. Now, when you have a government without the support of the church, without divine powers, without godly powers, where do you get the power to command the people? So then at that particular point, the notion of truth came into being. So people were thinking about there is something called a truth. The truth can be established by the humans. Truth is not necessarily a godly thing. It is a human thing. So the truth has to be established by the humans. So in order to establish the truth, various kind of sciences, various kind of disciplines came into being. So these are what we call medicine, law, accounting, criminology, sociology, political sciences, and so on. All sorts of sciences came into being. So remember that we did not have sciences before that. The sciences came into being to support a state which does not have the divine support, which does not have the religious leaders to tell this is the truth to follow. So what happened was basically the priest was replaced by scientists, the accountants, lawyers, doctors, and so on. So initially, there were the red cloaks, that is the cardinals, or the Catholic priest. Now they were replaced by white cloaks of doctors. They were replaced by the black cloaks of the lawyers. And then with lower level professions with the courts, like accountants and others. So that's how these institutions came into being at the very beginning, during the after the French Revolution, during the Victorian time, during the Industrial Revolution. So what happened was the society was transformed from a control society to a disciplinary society. The difference is this: there is a difference between control and disciplining. Before the modern world, we had a control society. People were controlled either by the whip or by a gun or by coercive means. So you will have a well-built, big, thug-type man with a whip to control the people. So that is controlling. Disciplining is a form of controlling, a better form of controlling. Disciplining means controlling through the knowledge. You don't control by, coercive, blunt use of power. Instead, you control the people by use of specific set of knowledge like medicine, accountancy, law, psychology, sociology, political sciences, and so on. So disciplining means that particular knowledge. Now, for example, if I go to see a doctor can ask me to be naked. In order to examine my body, a doctor will ask, take off your clothes, please. I would do it. So where do the doctor get that power to get me naked? In front of him or her. As a university lecturer, I don't have that power. As an accountant, you don't have that power. And a doctor has got that power because of the discipline called medicine. So he has the power to examine your body because he is attached to the thing called medicine, which is a specific set of knowledge, specific body of knowledge. So what we mean by a discipline is a well institutionalized, well established body of knowledge. So what do you see? Accounting is a discipline. Why accounting is a discipline? Accounting is a well institutionalized body of knowledge. It has a professional bodies. It has well reputed, well established qualification schemas. It has well reputed, well established training systems. And to become a chartered accountant, you have to follow that well-established protocols. So it is a discipline. It is not common knowledge. It is not simply knowledge. It is a disciplinary knowledge. So remember that there is a difference between disciplinary knowledge and simply knowledge. Now, for example, perhaps I might have read more accounting books than you, but I am not a chartered accountant. Fair enough, because I did not follow that particular protocols of becoming a chartered accountant. So the accountancy is a discipline because that chartered accountancy is a particular institutional setting within which that knowledge is established, that knowledge is executed. So that knowledge becomes power. So I can't audit financial accounts. I can't carry out the legal duties that a chartered accountant can carry out. So that's how the knowledge is organized into discipline. Similarly, you can't carry out the work of a doctor. No, you can't carry out, unless you have that particular qualification, a work of a lawyer. So that's what you call a disciplinary society. So the world moved into what we call a disciplinary societies during the modernity. And these disciplinary societies are governed, controlled through disciplines, specific bodies of knowledge, well institutionalized bodies of knowledge. And accounting is one of them. And it is a very important, critical disciplinary institution in the modern world. If accounting does not perform well, this society will be chaotic. If accountants do not do their job well, this society will be in a bit of a, not a bit, a huge problem. So we see how this disciplinary knowledge emerged in the recent time later on. And these, when you are talking about the disciplinary knowledge, the disciplinary societies are equally organized into what we call disciplinary institutions. So these disciplinary institutions include, for example, prisons. Prisons discipline people, or even rather control people. And then hospitals. Hospital is a disciplinary institution. So inside the hospital, doctors and nurses and paramedics discipline patients in a particular manner. Schools is a disciplinary institution. Universities is a disciplinary institution. Factories is a disciplinary institution. Offices is a disciplinary institution. And all institutions you see nowadays are one way or the other disciplinary institutions. So they would discipline you in a particular manner. When you enter a hospital, you are not an accountant, you become a patient. And you are subject, your body will be subjected to, or your body will be rendered to be examined by the doctors and nurses and so on. So when you enter the university to do a master's degree or a PhD, you would become a student and you will be examined by the lecturers and teachers and tutors and so on. And similarly, when you go to accounting firm as a trainee, you become a trainee article clerk. And then you would be examined by your managers, your superiors, as well as examination bodies, examination departments in the chartered institutions. So those are what you call disciplinary institutions. So you will understand the contemporary world since the Industrial Revolution, since or after the French Revolution. This modern world is populated by, organized by these disciplinary institutions. So So every institution you are entering into today is a disciplinary institution because they will discipline you in a particular manner using a particular sort of knowledge. And then these disciplinary institutions operate on what we call disciplinary principles. According to Foucault, there are 3 principles according to which you discipline the humans. Whether it is psychology, whether it is medicine, whether it is accounting, whether it is law, all these disciplines, one way or the other, in different ways, deploy these 3 disciplinary principles. The first principle is disciplining the space. So first thing what you do is you discipline the space. So you partition this place. The big, large world is partitioned. So disciplining space is basically the principle of partitioning. So you partition the big world into, say, countries, nation states, or unions like European unions. And inside these nation states, you will have industries. And then in these industries, you will have various disciplinary institutions. And inside the disciplinary institutions, you will have offices, rooms, corridors, canteens, and so on. So there are specific disciplinary partitions, disciplinary spaces in which you are performing in a particular manner. You have to behave in a particular manner. So when you are entering a temple or a mosque or a church, you would take off your hats, take off your slippers, and you discipline yourself in a particular manner. Because that is a particular space in which you become somebody. When you enter the hospital, you become a patient. And there are certain spaces you can't enter, only staff only. So this partitioning of the space can be physical as well as virtual. Now, for example, in a virtual environment, there are particular servers, particular rooms you can't enter. So either way, what we do, we discipline the space. In order to discipline the people, we partition the space and we discipline the space. So there are specific ways people have to behave when they enter a particular space. So accounting also partition the space. For example, conceptually, accounting does it not like architecture, not in a physical sense, in a conceptual sense. The accounting partition the whole organization into, for example, cost centers, revenue centers, profit centers, investment centers, machine centers, and so on. An accountant would partition the whole organization into specific reporting segments for segmental reporting purposes. An accountant would understand a particular entity as a subsidy or not. So accounting has various kind of principles, techniques, and so on, but to partition the space, either the virtual space or a conceptual space or the physical space. And even accounting may physically partition certain spaces. For example, certain officers might be, say, accounting office, nobody else would be allowed. It can be. The accounting can become a particular space, or a particular space can become only for accountants. So to summarize it, the first principle through which we discipline human beings is the discipline in the space. And it is done through partitioning the space into specific entities, specific localities. Accounting does it. And the second principle is disciplining the time. So not only you have to discipline the space, you have to discipline the time. Whether you are a doctor, lawyer, accountant, doesn't matter, you have to discipline the time. So you discipline the time through various kinds of technologies. For example, a budget, a timetable, a time schedule, ERP, enterprise resource planning. So it provides a particular time targets for various things, say standards and so on. So you have to make sure that a particular human being would be occupying a particular place and a machine or so on during a particular time. So you discipline the body. You have to make sure that the body is carrying out a particular work in a particular place at a particular time. So you discipline the time. Whether it is a hospital, it is the exact thing it's happening. So the doctor will come and tell to the patient exactly in 8 hours intervals, you have to take this medicine. And then the third principle is disciplining the human body. So you have to discipline the body, maneuvering it. So you have to train the people to use the body in a particular manner with a particular machine. If it is a typewriter, touch typing. If it is a gun, hold the gun in this particular manner. If it is a shovel, hold it in this particular manner. If it is a cricket bat, hold it in this particular manner, move it in this particular manner. Your head should be here, your leg should be here, your body should be here. So that is basically scientific management, Frederick W. Taylor's scientific management. So there are three things to be disciplined in our societies: space, time, and the human body. And all these institutions I mentioned so far, for example, a factory is a particular institution in which human body is confined. So I call it, or Foucault call it, anatomical politics of the human body. Whether it is management accounting, management, or whatever it is, what do? We confine the body into a particular place with a certain identity, such as a patient, doctor, nurse, accountant, machine operator, whatever it is. So you will confine the body into a particular place and get that particular body to perform a particular activity according to a time schedule. That's what we do. Now I am performing this particular task because my brother and others in this particular committee asked me, okay, your lecture will be from this time to this time, and get ready. So they disciplined my time and everything in a particular manner. So ultimately what we do, one way or the other, the management and all disciplines for that try to confine the human body in a particular place with a particular time schedule to perform a particular activity. The goods and services surplus value is created in that way. The outcome is the production. Whatever you produce, you do in that manner. So ultimately, all these disciplines, what it carries out is the anatomical politics. That is the politics of the human body. Confining, placing the human body on a space, time, condition to carry out a particular activity. Have I got any questions to answer from anybody? I hope no.
Not yet, Professor. What we can do is we can carry on like this and
all right, okay, yeah. So
yeah,
feel free to interfere me if you get any questions that I have to address in the meantime. That's fine.
Sure, yes.
Okay. And then now during this, or before that, so I will talk a little bit more about this. Now during this period, when this modern or the scientific management emerged, until say the beginning of the 20th century, there was no any strategy groups. There was no any strategic management textbooks. There was no anybody talking about, any managers talking about strategy per se. There was no strategy managers until 1960s. Yes, we know that the notion of strategy was a very old concept. The notion of strategy was there for 1,000 years, but not in the field of accounting or business, in the field of military sciences. In the 5th BC, we know there's a Chinese classic called The Art of War, which is one of the best classical book about the strategy. Master Sun Tzu's Art of War, or Chinese classic, more than 5,000 years old. And similarly, we know, for example, in 1832, General Carl von Zuys I think it's Swiss guy, okay, wrote a wonderful book called The On War, but they are military generals. So those notions of strategy was military sciences, but not in accounting, not in management, no. The notion of strategy started to came into being only in 1960s. Before that, it was almost absent, silent. That is because until 1950s, 60s, the total attention of management was on the factory floor, on the labor at the point of production. The total attention was to get the labor synchronized with the machine. Through scientific management, through motion studies, to time studies, and to standard costing and standard setting and so on, and costing mainly. The ultimate managerial attention was on the factory floor. Because 90%, 80% of the total cost of the organization is related to the factory. The administration, we didn't call it management at that time. Administration was a very small element of the organization. The administration is mainly populated by few managers and accountants. The accountant's role was basically bookkeeping and estimating the cost for the purpose of bookkeeping. So the accountants were known to be bean counters or simply record keepers using double entry bookkeeping systems. So you will understand until 1970s, 80s, clear, even the well-known accounting books like Spice and Pegler was called bookkeeping. And we didn't have the management accounting books, no? Until 1970s, 80s, we call it what? Costing. So we had the bookkeeping and costing. That is because the managerial attention was on the factory floor. The biggest challenge is to control the labor, discipline the labor, and make sure that the labor can use the machines as efficient as possible, according to the set standards. Then what happened? At the beginning of the 20th century, corporations started to grow very, very fast through mergers and acquisitions. The companies started to merge with other companies and acquire other companies. In the US economy itself, from the beginning of the 20th century up to 1960s, there were three major mergers and acquisition waves. So they are called three major, large mergers and acquisition waves. Companies like General Electric, Standard Oil, DuPont, Sears and Roebuck became huge corporations through mergers and acquisitions. So when these companies grew in a huge manner, in such a significant manner, then the problem became not the management of the factory floor, but the management of the organization as a totality, the corporation as a totality. So I have to emphasize that there were two institutional elements that underlie the management and accounting. First one is the invention of the factory. Second one is the invention of the corporation. So remember that the notion of corporation was not a very old one. It is only invented during the Industrial Revolution. The word first, incorporated company, limited liability company is East India Trading Company, established by a royal charter to colonize India, Sri Lanka, and so on. Well, that's the first limited liability company. So with that, then we came with the corporations. So these two elements, the factory and the corporation, is the institutional condition upon which modern management as well as accounting came into being. And then during this, after the, say, since the beginning of the 20th century, these corporations started to become what we call M-form organizations. multi-divisional organizations. So companies like DuPont became a kind of organizational form in which they had quasi-independent or almost very independent divisions, catering a different market or having a product line. So they all have different divisions operating independently. And then there is what you call a corporate head office. So there are, nowadays in strategic management accounting, we call them strategic business units or SBUs. That is the term we started to use for them after 1990s. So before that, we simply called them divisions, but independent divisions. And these independent divisions had their own factories, had their own accounting department, had their own marketing and sales department, had their own HR department or personnel management department, as it is called those days. So therefore, each and every individual division is an independent organization, independent business, but a division of the large corporation. So then we have what you call a corporate head office to oversee them, to consolidate them, to coordinate them. And that is the first time managing the corporation became more important and critical than the management of the factory floor. So as soon as management of the corporation became more important, you need another form of management. That is what we call corporate planning or corporate strategy. So in 1960s, we started to talk about corporate planning, business policy, corporate policy, and corporate strategy. Books like Iga Ansoff Corporate Strategy, Chandler's Strategy and Structure came into being. So that is the first time we see the notion of strategy penetrating into the business world. And then the business managers, accountants, marketeers started to read The Art of War. They started to read Carl von Zuys On War. And they started to reconceptualize, understand the market as a battlefield. They started to see general managers as generals. Okay? So the notion of strategy started to came into being. Now in this sort of informed organizations, the corporate managers faced three fundamental challenges. The first one is, how do you coordinate? How do you coordinate between these independent divisions? While maintaining them as independent entities, how do you ultimately consolidate them into independent or broader, bigger, larger corporation? And the second one is, how do you deal with the environment, the legal conditions, political conditions, economic conditions, and so on? And the third problem is, how do you keep on diversifying? How do you keep on making these large corporations larger, these huge corporations much more huge? So that's the three big challenges for the corporate planners: coordination, environmental integrity, and the diversification. Now, if you talk about coordination, this is done through mainly three basic corporate management activities. One is setting the long-term goals. So the people started to talk about long-term goals like vision and missions, corporate goals, and so on. So the corporate managers will set long-term goals for the corporations, and then from them derive the goals for the divisions. And the divisions are connected with the corporation through such goals. So that is how they coordinate it. So the long-term goals started to operate as a mean through which this coordination is achieved. And then also they establish what you call corporate policies. The whole set of policies which is applicable for all these divisions, including accounting policies. So there will be accounting policy statements sent to all these specific divisions, and the divisional heads, divisional managers should follow that accounting policies. And these are very important for what you call consolidation purposes. And then ultimately resource allocation. And then, so you know that these individual business entities will create a profit. The division A will have a profit, and division B will have a profit, division C will have a profit. But all that profits are ultimately belong to the corporation. And they are all pooled in the head office. So there's an investment fund in the head office. And the head office managers will decide where that money should be reinvested. So they will have various kind of strategic management models, such as Boston Consultancy Group growth share matrix, GE 9-cell matrix, to reallocate this funding, to decide investment and divestment. So the corporate managers will see these divisions as either a dog or a star or a cow or a question mark, if you remember your management courses. Okay. So what do they do? So they have these divisions. They label these divisions as, dog, stars, question marks, and cows, and then decide, okay, this business is a cow in a saturating business market, but big cash flows, milk it, get the money as much as possible, put into a star. Star is a wonderful guy in a wonderful place, going to be a cash cow in the future, make him a cash cow. And here is a dog, bad guy in a bad place, unattractive market, and a weak guy, shooting, take everything out and give to the other guys. Okay. So those are the things they did. So that is what you call resource allocation. Those are the things that you learned under your strategic management courses. So you understand the logic behind all these models. All these models of strategic management is there to address one of these issues, either the issue of coordination or the issue of environmental integrity, like SWOT analysis, pest analysis, pestle analysis. They're dealing with the environment. And then the diversification. For example, IGANS of market product diversification grid. So those are the tools. So if you read all the strategic management books, you can easily understand all these techniques came into being, all these consultancy models came into being to address either one or all of these issues. The issue of coordination, issue of environmental connection, and issue of diversification. And then in 1990s and 80s, late 80s and 90s, we understand that managers, consultants, and the strategy gurus started to understand it is not planning the strategy, it is not designing the strategy which is more problematic, but implementation. Implementation is the problem. Change management is the problem. Therefore, in 1990s onward, with the book called In Search of Excellence, Peters and Waterman, and then book called Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge, a new trend came into being. The people factor, cultural factor, the institutional factor brought in. People try to understand various kind of behavioral, cultural, institutional, and structural factors that either hinder or facilitate the implementation of strategies, making the change possible. So the things like, change management, continuous improvement, learning organizations came into being. They became very, very popular. And they became multi-billion consultancy industry. So there are what you call change champions, change agent, and so on. So now you understand how these things happen. So until 1960s, the accountancy and business was not concerned about strategy because the primary problem was managing the labor process. And then as the organizations grew into large multi-divisional forms, managing the hierarchy, managing the organization itself became very critical. And then in 1960s, the notions of strategic management accounting, strategic HRM, strategic marketing, strategic personnel management started to emerge. Because the issue is managing the organization as a strategic entity. How to make this organization compatible with the environment. How do you coordinate all these individual divisions? How do you keep on diversifying? The answer was strategizing. And then you realize strategic planning is necessary but not sufficient. A proper strategic implementation is also important. For that end, we need to bring in behavioral, cultural, institutional, and structural elements. So the framework such as McKinsey's 7S framework became very important. And Johnson and Kaplan's balanced scorecard became very important because balanced scorecard tried to transform the budgets into a different system of performance management, one that can connect with the strategy. So the balanced scorecard became one of the very popular implementation technique of strategy. So you understand the logic here, how we moved from factory to the organization. Now, in this neoliberal world, okay. Now, what happened since roughly 1980s and 70s? The world became neoliberalized. Neoliberalization started with Margaret Thatcher in UK and Reagan in US. And before 1970s, and in Sri Lanka by J.R. Jayawardena. Okay. And before this time, the world was rather closed. Even US, UK had what you call closed economies, or partially closed economy, or controlled economies. There were import and export duties. Labor migration was very, very restricted. And suddenly, as a political doctrine, as a political philosophy, governments across the world, including the China and including Russia, started to embrace a different political philosophy, open markets. So they opened the markets, they opened the economies. Goods and services were easily moved from boundaries, so country to country, and the capital restrictions were lifted. Foreign direct investment were encouraged. So suddenly we are in a different political world quickly. And with that, what happened was globalization. The market became globalized. So what I mean by globalization is the embodiment of the globe into the human beings. So the customers, so the production were all over the world. So globalization, I can talk about the globalization in three different tones. The globalization involved global firms like Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and all the firms nowadays. All big, large corporations are globalized. They don't have a national identity anymore. So they are everywhere. The head office might be in New York or Washington or in London or in Tokyo or in Beijing. But their call centers are all over the place. Their factories are all over the place. Their distribution centers are all over the place, all over the world. So we have the global firms and we have global brands. The globalization is manifested by global firms, global brands, and then the global markets and the global supply chain, and also what we call globalized consumer. That is the most important element, globalized consumer. Now, how do I explain this notion of globalized consumer? That is the consumer who incorporated all these global brands into his or her body. Now, a few months ago, I was watching Indian Premier League, IPL. So you can see the IPL is a globalized cricket tournament. So you see in a Mumbai team, Indians, Australians, Sri Lankans, everybody's there. And not that is the team, that is the firm, that is the brand, the global brand. But when you look at the audience, not this year, previous year, you can see a guy, 13, 14 years kid is watching this game, highly animated, wearing a chic, this head thing, and wearing an Adidas t-shirt and a Nike trouser, holding an Apple phone in his hand and wearing a Samsung watch. You understand what I mean by a globalized body. So that's the globalized consumer. So these brands are incorporated, embodied by these consumers. There's a large set of consumers, large majority of the consumers are ready and willing to pay in order to bring these things into his or her body. So the people are now ready to reconfigure their individual bodies with the messages, with the images put forward by these brands. So that's what I mean by ultimate globalization. The ultimate globalization takes place in the body of the consumer at that particular level. And it is done through global brands, global supply chains, global firms, and so on, global markets or global marketing platforms. So that's a global. And then together with this neoliberalization of the politics, globalization of the markets and institutions, there was what you call digitalization and virtualization of management and technologies. There are three things: neoliberalization of politics, globalization of markets and hierarchies, and thirdly, digitalization and virtualization of the technologies and management. So now accounting, management, everything is happening on a digital platform, on a virtual world, including this lecture, Zoom. Cloud accounting and everything is happening now. The markets are on these platforms, on eBay, on Alibaba, on Amazon, and so on Facebook, and so on. Okay? So that's the three things happened. So these three things interconnectedly created what we call neoliberal world or a new brave world. Now in this new world, what happened to us? What happened to people? Or in other words, what happened to labor? Labor becomes increasingly entrepreneurs. In this neoliberalized, globalized, digitalized, and virtualized world, the labor becomes entrepreneurs. Now, 40, 50 years ago, the life was, blue-collar workers' life was very simple. So you will go to the school, pass through the school, possibly go to a university, and then find a job, and you carry out that job for 30, 40 years with a minimum number of promotions, possibly become a manager or whatever it is, large majority of the people, and then retire. And you had a permanent job, permanent income, and a pension. And you were being hired. Your labor was being purchased by a capitalist, a business owner. And you didn't face any risk. You didn't face any risk. Instead, you just went and worked. Whether the business earned a loss doesn't matter. You will be paid a fat salary. You are entitled for that salary. And you will have a pension. So that's a stable, regular life of a laborer. Especially in European economies here, that was the case. Large majority of people, or 99% of the people, never thought to be entrepreneurs. They just did a job like a doctor, teacher, mechanic, engineer, whatever it is. They just did a job and raise a family. Now it is not the case. Now, instead of being that, laborers are asked to, people are asked to create their own businesses, take the risk. Now think about, for example, development agenda, not only in Sri Lanka, everywhere in the world. Until 1970s, the development of any country was basically based on having large manufacturing plants. Therefore, Sri Lanka during 1980s, 70s, started huge factories like Timber Corporation, Plywood Corporation, Cement Corporation, Dairy Corporation, and so on. And then the people were given jobs in there. So people were given permanent long-term jobs. So since 1990s, that particular agenda is no more working. Instead, the people are given a microfinance loan. So they don't be given a job. The government job responsibility is not to give them a job, but rather to give them a loan and ask them, you create your business and grow and take your risk and pay us interest. So that's what is happening. Even within the factories, even within the large corporations, now managers have to become entrepreneurs. For example, as a university professor or as a university lecturer 10-15 years ago, 10-15 years ago, my job was basically do research and teaching, and the university will pay me. So I didn't have to worry about earning money. University will provide me money. University may give me research money, and then I have to use that research money and carry out my research and train my or teach my students. The situation is not that now. As professors, we have to apply for funding. We have to keep on writing what you call funding applications and earn money for my own job. So it is not anymore the responsibility and the risk of the business as organization as a whole, but do it as that. So in other words, what happened? Everything in this world during this particular neoliberal world is transformed into entrepreneurship or businesses. The point is that you don't have any more doctors. You have doctors doing a business. And you don't have any more engineers doing engineering. They have engineers doing a business of engineering. You don't have accountants doing the job of accountancy or accounting auditing. Instead, they have a business, even inside the organization, running the department of accounting. They have to keep on justifying, is it enough? Every time you are going to recruit a new clerk, you have to have a business case. You have to prove that there is a profitability, there is a kind of contribution from this particular new appointment. Everything needs to be justified by what we call business cases. Every small decisions that you are making inside your department now have to be justified through business cases. That means in its own way, everything has become an entrepreneurial task, a business task. You run it as a business. Your life has to be run as a business. So therefore, conventionally, labor did the hard laboring work. So accounting clerk, audit clerk, or whoever goes there, carry out hard laboring job for 8 hours a day, do that. And all the immaterial labor. So all material labor were done by the laborers. Immaterial labor, that is the affectionate, motivation, communication, and all those things were done by the managers. Now the job that the immaterial labor carried out by the managers are now have to be carried out by the laborers themselves. So they have to work on that. So these immaterial labor also a part of the laboring itself now, a worker itself. So the boundary between capital and labor is demolished. The boundary between the management and the laboring or the worker is by and large disappearing. Everybody has to become a laborer, everybody has to become a manager. So these are both infused together. And it is done through various kind of new knowledge, new technologies, and so on, including Facebook. And most of the time, people carry out this immaterial labor without receiving any money for that. No wages for that. Example, everyone in this world, perhaps majority of people in this world work for the Facebook without being paid. And Facebook is basically running out of what you call free labor. 90% of free labor is Facebook. And you carry out YouTube. You do your videos and you carry out everything and you upload, so YouTube runs. Why? You do it. So therefore now you understand in this neoliberal world, the rich or the powerful or successful capitalist, successful business people, what do? They do not anymore manage. They do not anymore just run a conventional business. They create the market. They create and recreate the market. Example, Amazon. Now, if you think about, monopoly capitalism, that is until 1960s, 70s, or even 80s, the big, large corporations that symbolized the capitalistic world was Ford, Toyota, General Electric, and so on. So those are the big, large companies that manifested, that symbolized the successful organizations in the world. Nowadays, all these, Ford and everything is Nobu, they are there, but they are not the symbolizing organizations. They are not anymore the organizations that symbolizes the contemporary world. The contemporary world is symbolized by Google, Facebook, Amazon, Alibaba, and so on. What are these organizations? They are simply creating a platform, a virtual digital platform. And on that platform, others can become entrepreneurs. Everybody else can reproduce their life, and everybody else can put their life into circulation. So nowadays, the successful capitalists create the market, recreate the market, mostly as a platform upon which others transform their lives. So, for example, Zoom came out with the transformation, this particular platform. Within a very quick time, Zoom became a huge multi-billion industry or firm. And then I am reproducing my life. I am changing my life to suit with the Zoom. So I got a green screen behind my desk now. I spend a bit of money for that, and put a green screen behind me. And when I record these things, so I have a green screen, I can later on get that into Adobe Premiere, take the green screen off and put some other, virtual screen and create nice, wonderful letters moving. So that's how I do now. So they created the platform, I reinvent my life. And I have to become, so that reinvention of life is what we call entrepreneurship. Continuously keep on reinventing your life. And modern corporations provide that platform for you to do it. And that's what has happened to the laborer. That's what happened to the usual normal worker. Whether you are an accountant, whether you are a professor, whether you are a laborer, doesn't matter. We all ultimately sell our ability, our skill, the things that we learned. In other words, our labor, in a broader sense. So this is what happens here. Now, in this particular world, how do we see the accounting? So what is the role of accounting now? Whether it is management accounting, financial accounting, or any other form of accounting. For example, social and environmental accounting, human rights accounting. There are so many kinds of accounting nowadays. Now we know in a conventional sense, the role of accounting is sort of stewardship, sort of reporting, telling the truth and fairness, telling what happened in a factual manner. Yes, it is still important. Yes, it is still there. But the role of accounting is now more than that. The role of accounting is enabling and enacting these markets. So you have to enable and enact these markets. And where is these markets are? Oh, sorry, yeah. There's this particular one, I will come to that, yeah. So where is this markets? Markets are everywhere. And what do you mean by market? So you know that conventional economics normally visualize the market as the interaction between demand and supply. For a classical, neoclassical economist, market is the point at which, or the site in which, the demand meets the supply. So you have a demand curve and a supply curve, and decide the price and the quantity. So that is how the economist thought about the market. Yes, still the economics think about the market in that manner. And it is very good for a particular analytical purposes. I don't say it is a bad conception, it's a good conception, but only for a particular purpose. Now, when we think about markets in a broader sense, in accounting terms, in managerial terms, in political and sociological terms, markets are not that. Everything is a market. Market is everywhere. Market is enacted and created through numbers. Various sort of numbers as well as stories. Now, market is in your screen. It is a curve moving all over the place. So the people are observing the market. And there's a TV channel 24 hours a day. Every day, this channel runs on Bloomberg channel. And it talks nothing else but the market. It is totally dedicated to talk about the stock markets. And in this channel, 24 hours time, so they have various kind of, New York stock market chart moving. So there's a chart moving, and people are thinking about that. Wow, that's market. And on the airports, you see that. And on the big, huge screens, you see that. That's what you call NASDAQ. The market is on your screens. Stock market is on your screen. It is a moving curve. It's a moving thing. And similarly, the market are very personalized. Not necessarily, stock market, goods market, output market. So your life is a market. Because market is basically competition. In a classical economic sense, we thought competition is enabled and enacted in the market. Therefore, the market is what makes the competition possible. And what makes a price tag for the competition, an income for the competition, a return for the competition, and risk for the competition. Now what is happening? Everything is converted into a market. So you have because everything is enacting the competition in a one way or the other. Competition between you and your friend. Competition between my wife and my friend's wife on Facebook, regarding what they eat, regarding various kind of photos and everything, likes and dislikes. Okay. And YouTube. Okay. And everywhere the competition is enabled and enacted. So anything that enact and enable the competition is the market. And by enacting and enabling the competition, you run your businesses and you earn money, you make profit. So therefore, nowadays, job of accounting is to enable and enact market. So in other words, competition. So you create a competition. If you don't have any other competition, you have to make sure that you create a competition of self. Myself compete with me. If you can't create any other kind of a competition, the business world will create a competition of myself. I am competing with me. My yesterday beat the yesterday, beat the last minute. Now beat me. I have to beat myself. I had to say, for example, 20 minutes run on my exercise machine. Okay, today I have to do 25 minutes. Or bit faster. Whatever it is. So you convert them through these kind of what you call smart watches, step counters. So what do? They provide the numbers. And remember, in enabling and enacting competition, you need numbers. So you have to create numbers. You have to create numbers from anything possible, everything possible. That's called analytics. That's called big data. Okay? Any click, anything people do, convert it into a number. Or any sort of another representation. May not be necessarily a solid number, but some kind of a representation like a likes or dislikes or symbols, smiling faces, whatever it is. Okay? So either one way or the other, some sort of assessment. Okay? So that's what accounting now do. Everything, accounting is trying to do everything numbering. So the accounting is moving into many, many fields. Now, when I did my degree, I had only financial accounting, management accounting, and auditing. Those are the key subjects. And all the other things are subsidiary subjects. Now I have to teach management accounting, strategic management accounting, sustainability accounting, social and environmental accounting, which means an accounting for human rights. For example, if you look at the Glasgow University course outline, catalog of courses, you see what? Accounting for human rights, accounting for anti-slavery, accounting for money laundering, and all those things. Everything has to be accounting now. Okay, so the accounting or the financial reporting is now beyond financial, what you call corporate reporting is, governance is now beyond financial reporting. If you look at a modern day company, say for example, BHP Billiton, if you go to that big, large mining company's website, BHP Billiton, the financial report is only a very tiny, small element of financial reporting, sorry, corporate reporting. They have, I don't know, 20, 30 odd reports. Indigenous people report and this report and so many reports. And the accountants have to deal with them as well. Now, the accountant's job is getting into everything because the governance is an assemblage. Governance is not simply a matter of the connection between the shareholder and the board of directors. That's what the UK governance code talks about. I know. That's how various accounting bodies and the governance codes talk about. Governance is the connection between board of directors and the shareholders. That's the classic legal view of governance. But in the real world, in the actual world, when you look at actually the number of reports that these corporations are producing, governance is much more bigger than that. They have to deal with all sort of stakeholders, all sort of various connections. And it is an assemblage of all these sort of legal conditions and regulatory conditions, ethical conditions. And this is happening because why? In this neoliberal world, when the globe is open, when it is virtualized, when it is digitalized, when it is globalized, while there's a legal, acceptable, wonderful developments happening, while all these good things are happening, the bad things gets multiplied. So when you have a flow of capital, you have what you call a flow of black market capital or money laundering. When you have the migration and immigration of free labor moving from one country to other, you have modern slavery. When you have wonderful industrial development, you have environmental troubles. So what with all these formal flows, all these acceptable good flows, there's a bad flow moving. Every time you create a good flow, and that good flow will create a bad flow. And therefore, what is the problem? To manage and govern that bad flow, to control that bad flow. So to control that bad flow, various kind of legal, ethical, political demands are imposed upon the organizations. Therefore, organizations has to say that my supply chain is not using any child abused labor or child labor, no any modern slavery implications, no any, what do you call this, money laundering issues. So the government, corporations now have to prove it. So the accountants have to play a huge role in that. So you now understand how the governance become a huge assemblage, very, very complicated, complex issues. Because the governance is in a one way or the other. Governance basically means mitigating this counter flow, mitigating this illegal flow, mitigating these bad flows created by the good flows themselves. Okay, so that's the governance. It is not simply making sure that shareholders are having a right on the things. That world is gone now. Even though some international accounting standard bodies cannot move beyond that, that world is gone now because the corporations are no more owned by shareholders. That's a fallacy. That's a typical old classic economics, accounting, and management fallacy. We believe that shareholders own the corporations. Yes, legally true, but actually no. Corporations own the shareholders. Corporations are bigger than the shareholders. For example, Amazon and all those corporations are huge things, and they have shares. They sell their shares. And if I am a saver, if I have a bit of money saved in my pocket, I will buy a share. So I am just a transactor. I don't govern, I don't control Amazon. The managers do that. Okay? So frankly speaking, the shareholders do own the firm in legal terms, but in real terms, they don't. Instead, corporations have a transaction and borrow money from the shareholders. And for that, they pay the dividends. And to legitimize that, there's a market. Okay? And most of the time, I buy my shares in the secondary market anyway. Okay? Not for the purpose of owning a company, but for the buying a share and selling it. That's all. I just buy a share, but not the corporation, and sell a share. Okay? So that's how that is. So the governance is not simply, to repeat it again, the connection between the shareholder and the board. It is much more beyond that. It is huge than that. It's a large global ensemble. And it includes even the governance of development. So therefore, the private corporations do have to talk about Millennium Development Goals, Sustainability Development Goals, and they have to produce sustainability reports. So that's governance. Okay, and then what is happening? Because of all these things, the disciplinary boundaries are imploding. So we can't anymore talk about accounting per se, financial reporting per se. Yes, there are certain specifications, but we are increasingly encroaching the other field, and we have to become accountant. Everybody has to become accountant. Everybody is now reporting. Reporting is not necessarily numerical, even though we convert them into numbers later on. Most of the time, reporting is storytelling. And if you look at a corporate reporting, you have a lot of stories, a lot of images, a lot of narratives. That's how you report nowadays. So simply, more than simply calculating a number and reporting it, as an accountant, as a corporate reporter, you should be able to create a narrative, create a story, write a wonderful story, and then make that story beautiful with images, photos, diagrams, analytical charts, various visuals created by Adobe Illustrator or any other software packages. So you look at numbers are stories, and everything is put into a kind of storyline. So you have to use Microsoft Sway or any other, whatever the kind of software you have, okay, to put this story proper. So even the financial accounts now has to be retold as a story. So the storytelling is a huge function of accountants today, at least here in the Western world. So that's what we discussed in our accounting theory classes, in our final year classes. Now, how do you tell a story out of these numbers? How do you create a kind of a story out of this particular case so that you can report your thing to somebody else? For example, last year we had a kind of project, me and two of my colleagues, with the Glasgow City Council. So Glasgow City Council calculate a huge number of technical data on carbon emissions. And when you report that technical data as a technical reports, nobody can understand it. People have no clue about what the hell it is. So now we are thinking about the ways of providing this data on big billboards, changing TV screens in supermarkets and everywhere. When you go to huge supermarkets, shopping malls, so there are large display screens. So how do you put certain technical data on that screen so that it moves nicely, eye-catching manner, and people understand, wow, did I do that? So this particular area of the town created this big amount of carbon emissions. Wow, we got to do something about it. Okay, so that's the kind of project people are now talking about. How do we create these numbers into stories? Because remember, historically, storytelling has always been the most influential way of communicating in the human life. Even now, when you are talking with your friends, what do? You tell stories. You talk about your good old days, bad old days, school days with stories. So if we can bring that storytelling into corporate reporting, it would do a big job, wonderful change. So accounting is going to be that. If you see corporate reporting, you see this storytelling is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay, so that's the end. So I am leaving a lot of time for you to ask questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. That was a very insightful session. I mean, it is always good to go back to the roots and see where all these things have started. You know, sometimes when we are too busy managing the day-to-day things and, you know, just crunching the numbers, but sometimes we forget where all these things have come from and how these have originated. And there is a historical background to all these things we are doing right now, and it has evolved over a period of time. That's really interesting. And it's totally a different perspective too, because, you know, when we start in university, probably in the early years, we study a lot of theory and, you know, this subjects on evolution. And later on, once we become professionals, we tend to forget this and do things for the sake of doing, you know, just to satisfy management, you know, release a report here or there. And we completely forget how or from where these principles and theories and practices have come from. And most important part in today's lecture for me, Professor, the point you highlighted about discipline in any subject, how these subjects have evolved over a period of time. And that is, I mean, that is a very interesting part because, you know, at the end of the day, whatever we are doing in the organization, in a corporate structure, and without we knowing it, we are doing it. And now I'm thinking back and, you know, I'm realizing, yes, this is all, everything is to do with the discipline. You know, it could be accounting and ERP system or our reporting, standard operating procedures and manuals we have in the companies. It's all about the discipline. That is very interesting. So, Professor, just to take this Q&A session forward, now, currently, in today's context, especially when we are in the middle of a pandemic and everybody is wondering what is going to happen in future, and the focus in terms of reporting and especially management reporting and management accounting is shifting towards what is going to happen. And, you know, practically on a day-to-day basis, we are seeing in companies, the management is asking for projections. They are not interested in what happened in 2019. Don't show us what happened in first quarter of 2020. Show us what is going to happen in 2021 and show us what is going to happen from November and December. So there is a focus shift also. This may be entirely not relevant to what we discussed. But Professor, from management accounting point of view, with your expertise, how do you think in a situation like this, especially during a middle of pandemic, we can forecast things and bring those things into our reporting, or how we can modify the way we report in a situation like this?
Yes, so this pandemic condition, they were there for a long histories. No, we had a pandemic situations, but that pandemic situations were rather what you call regionalized. So this is the first time we got what you call a rather global pandemic.
Yeah.
That is because of the specific nature of the COVID. And that is mainly because the COVID can be spread by a body which is not displayed yet. Now, for example, what is that disease in Ebola? Ebola had in Africa. It is more deadlier than this. It is more dangerous than this. But the thing is, Ebola, when you get Ebola, you are on the bed. You can't move. You are quarantined by the what you call disease itself. Okay. So therefore, it is automatically the disease itself has a what you call a kind of a controlling mechanism. COVID didn't have it. It goes flash. Now, the implication for this one management, we had these kind of discussions in the Western world, especially in universities and other organizations in the Western world. For example, I can still remember when I was in Aberdeen 4 years ago. Suddenly we had a one-day workshop. Okay? All the business school staff was invited for that and asked to talk about, in case of an emergency, in case of a global disaster, how would you plan your course? How would you deliver your course? We had those things, but they were just taken as what you call rhetorical. Nobody take it serious. Everybody was laughing. Everybody was joking. Understand? Now that particular scenario will be inbuilt as a very solid, very acceptable scenario. I'm sure that very soon, in another 3-4 years time, it takes time, various international accounting standard bodies or governance bodies, European Union and so on, will pass laws. So your annual report would have to have a separate section, either chairman's report or whatever it is, specifically pointing how this particular corporation, what sort of measures that they have put in place to face this kind of a scenario in the future. So in other words, risk reporting will get much more consolidated. Risk reporting will get much more fine-tuned. Okay, risk reporting will become much more imposed requirement. Okay, so that's the one area that the accounting and everybody else now will move into that. So the corporate reporting will and should be enhanced in this particular direction. Whether this particular organization is ready for a pandemic situation. And should I invest in this particular company? If that company is not ready, I would say no, I wouldn't. Okay? And this will come from the investors. Investors nowadays basically means not the individuals, but large institutional investors, such as pension funds. Okay. The large majority of investment scenarios in the market are governed and modified and handled, dominated, not by thousands and millions of individual investors, no, but by the large institutional investors. Okay, and they would say, we don't want to put our big institutional money into a particular company who can't tell us how this particular company has already put the things in place to handle a scenario like COVID in the future. Okay. So that will get, it will become a bigger element of what you call governance. As I said earlier, governance is managing this counterflow. So the viral is a what? Counterflow. Understand? Governments and the various international bodies are putting that on not only the physical virus, but on the computer virus. Understand? The European Union has laws about the computer virus. If you break your data disclosure, privacy laws, you will be fined millions and billions. Understand? So that is what you call hacking viruses. So the computer viruses, computer hacking, and all these counterflows related to the virtual world is by and large regulated now. But the real human viruses, physical, biological viruses, is a counterflow. When the people move, that's a legal, nice, wonderful move. People coming from China to here and from here to everywhere. So people move. Understand? With that move, what is happening? There's a counterflow coming, dangerous flow happening. As I said, every good flow creates a what? Bad flow. Okay? The mitigation of that bad flow is governance. Okay? So in the future, I expect the governments and everybody is to bring more standards, impositions, laws, and everything. Okay? Demanding the corporations tell us how you would handle this kind of a thing. If you don't do that, you will be in trouble. Okay? So the management accounting implication is there's an issue on medical efficiency. So therefore, the spare capacity should not be taken anymore as a wastage. Anything idle, if a hospital has 20 beds not occupying any time, Okay? Should not be taken as what you call a wastage. So we might go beyond a little bit what called just-in-time logic. Understand? So you have to tolerate to a certain extent, all these spare capacities, which we are taken as what you call wastages in just-in-time Japanese management and so on. So we might have to rethink about it. Is it really something? No, you have to have a spare capacity. The people are dying from COVID in the Europe, not because necessarily not because of the COVID, but the hospitals can't cater them. They don't have spare capacity. You understand? Okay. Any more questions? I hope that I answered that.
Yeah, the way you ended it was very good, Professor, because I mean, in a situation like this, you can't always look at just-in-time system and say, okay, I will bring him on this particular time, and when the lives are being lost. So that was very clear, Professor. And there's one question from Priyanta, and asking how we can use artificial intelligence to support storytelling in accounting, because this is an increasing trend, especially in accounting. And we even had a session on how to automate, on robotic process automation. We had a webinar, and I think people are aware of that. We have given a slide background, a couple of weeks ago. So how we can use AI. Professor, also I will add to that question now when we talk about AI, mostly we are talking about currently at present, because we are at this region at an infancy stage where it is just started picking up, and people are just, especially organizations are just started looking at automating the day-to-day, routine task where you reconcile your bank account, pass one or two entries here and there. They're looking at very transactional related matters. So how we can use AI into management accounting, reporting, also on forecasts, because management accounting is not really into this day-to-day transaction. So it is also about our forecast reporting also. So how we can incorporate, and is there a trend in EU or in the part where you lecture on this, where the companies start using AI for projections and reporting?
So one of the biggest challenge nowadays the world is having is the world is creating a massive, super amount of numerical data, including the share market data and all those things. Everything is stored in the databases mainly as numbers. Okay. Now the problem is, as I said earlier regarding the Glasgow City Council, so we have numbers, but these numbers cannot be comprehended, cannot be understood by the general public as such. They has to be translated into words, into narratives. So this is the area where the AI and various kind of programming things are coming. I'm not expert in this particular area in technical sense, but I know one of my good friend, Dr. Kapila Ponnamperuma, is a computer engineer, programmer. He originally worked in Glasgow University, Aberdeen University owned subsidiary company. Okay? And now that company is a independent company now. So their job is, for example, I'm giving an example. So this North Sea oil companies have a lot of oil platforms in the North Sea, and they create every second through the machines lot and lot of data, numerical data, observations. So their job is to create a kind of a program. So these numbers will be read and written into word-based reports. So that's their job. No, that's a very emerging, highly demanding field of technology. Okay, how to translate these numbers, okay, huge, massive data sets into meaningful, understandable, communicatable slogans, big messages. Understand? So that is already happening. And companies are investing millions of pounds developing these things. That's what you call, now, for example, if you look at Amazon, if you go to the Amazon AWS, Amazon web platform, so they have what you call a Poly. Amazon Poly and Amazon, I can't remember, Azure and all those things. They have various things. Okay? And Amazon, now, for example, that include even voice recognition, okay? Numerical translation. Amazon is capturing these kind of things now. So when a small company is there, or Google, when a small company is doing this particular job, what is happening? Google or Amazon buy that for billions. Okay? Why? Because they see the necessity of them. Okay? Because independently, every individual on their own, been working for Amazon, Google, and so on, create the data. So through your clicks, through your own input, you create huge numbers. They has to be translated into. Okay? So that's the one key area AI is working. But I'm not a technical expert to say, how the technicality is being constructed. So you have to talk about, like guy like, Kapila, okay? to talk about actually how this program is done. Okay? But you have to pay for that. But I am 100% sure that is a key area where the data analytics is now moving into. Okay? At the moment, or by and large, big data and the data analytics is grabbing the numbers and summarizing them and putting into big numbers. Understand? Using visual techniques. And now you have to create a story for that number. Okay? Attaching another photograph of some person, poor person from Ethiopia. Okay? Tagging some, newspaper item. Suddenly, so here is a story. So can the computer itself tag a suitable another story, video clip, or a photograph from this world of web information? Understand? So that's how it is going on. So that's a very good question, and I'm 100% sure that's the one area that the professional accountants, if you have lesser time, get into and study a bit.
Thank you, Professor. And there's one last question, I think.
And there would be a good, consultancy project in that area. So you don't have to be expert of that. You can buy a good expert and organize something, and you can sell that to the companies.
There's one more question, Professor, from Shanta. What are the key challenges of implementing a strategic formulation in a business where top management is not so much into this? How do we overcome them and move forward as financial professionals? Maybe I think his question is on now as a finance professional, if you have a good strategy and a way forward, but the top management is not really into it, how do we tackle this problem? It's a very practical question. So
yeah, it's a too practical question. I can't really answer that question in a very basic sense, because why it all depends on the personal conditions and everything. So I can, in a broader sense, I can say, if I don't know, if I'm a kind of a person talking to my colleagues, I would say why these particular big people don't worry about. They might have a really good, reasonable things. Okay, and also remember, in any organization, including the universities, there has always been a rivalry between professions. Understand? So that's a wonderful paper by my PhD supervisor long ago, Pete Armstrong. So how the HR and the accounting people are, fighting each other to dominate each other and to establish certain things. Okay. So people create their identities in a particular manner. Okay. For example, marketing expert might be thinking we are the expert in this field, not the accountants. Understand? Now, when the accountants are trying to encroach other field, they might have to certain instances. You have to be very careful. How do you play the organizational politics? Okay. It's not easy. It is always difficult. Okay? And that's what I said. I can't give exact thing, but as a generic condition, I can say such rivalries are very common in every organizational type. Okay? An organization is a site in which people compete, because everything is now competition. Okay? And people are, trying to establish their names, because that is about their careers. That is about their whole, futures. Okay? So you have to be very careful. How do you handle it? Okay. And one thing about the good leader is, as I remember, long ago, my good teacher, Professor Nanayakar in PIM, when I did the masters, where I got my master's from the PIM. So he used to tell us, if you want to be a good leader, the first thing is be a good follower first. If you want to be a good leader, first thing is be a follower first. You can't make anybody to listen to you unless you listen to them. So you have to listen to them and then talk about them, be open a bit, no? And that's a very generic guidance. I can't answer that question specifically. That all depends on the type of personalities people have, type of gossips and rumors going on in the picture, and type of stake that individuals do have. Okay? And also remember, when it comes to the strategies are not necessarily well planned and implemented. Certain strategies are emerging, as Mintzberg kept on telling. Good strategies are sometimes just emerge. Nobody plans it, it comes. Now, for example, if you look at the cricket, when I was a kid, nobody plays hammering cricket in the very first 10 overs. We got defend and defend and defend. And suddenly, Kaluvitharan and Jayasuriya went to 1996 World Cup and started what? Pinching over the head. And that became the style of strategy now. Everybody does it now. Better than any Sri Lankans, anyway. So that strategy, for example, in cricket, just emerged. Nobody planned it. I can remember when I was young, when I'm listening to Premasiri Apasinga's commentary, he kept on telling, "Ita dakum kalu paharak." Young ක්‍රීඩකීන් අනිවාර්යෙන් නැරඹිය යුතු පාරක්. බෝලය පතිත වෙන ස්ථානයට පාදයේ නිසියාකාරව යම පිත්ත කෙලින් යවා හිස නිසියාකාරව තබාගෙන පාරක් එල්ල කළා. ඉතාම දකුම් කළු පාරක්. කෙසේ නමුත් ලකුණක් ලබා ගැනීමට අවකාශයක් නැත. ඒක ඔක්කොම කියලා කියනවා කෙසේ නමුත් ලකුණක් ලබා ගැනීමට අවකාශයක් නැත. ඒ කාලේ because in that time if you have a center field and if you put a ball, the batsman will play the proper cricket shot. For that ball, this shot. So the ball goes there. So 50 over match, you get what? 150 runs. Okay. Now, no, you can't. He will do various other kind of things. So that's the strategy. So they emerge. So where you interact, you emerge. So what you need is reflection on them. Reflection on them. The most of the time, what is happening is at the moment, you and me and everybody, common for us all, we don't have time. So you need to have a lesser time. As you said, you need to have a time to read. At least, an hour a day, at home or somewhere, set out a time so that you can think, reflect. I don't have a word for this one in English. I can only say it in Sinhalese. We never call in Sinhalese buddhiya, we call it viveka buddhiya. Because buddhiya never works without the viveka. Understand? So we have no way to say it in English. But Sinhala is a wonderful language, it says what? Viveka buddhiya. Understand what I mean? Viveka nathuwa buddhiya vada karane naha. So think about your head, think about your boss, reflect upon them, and then decide how you can handle it. It has to come from you. Any other questions? You are muted, Usman.
Yeah, there is one more, Professor. I'm not sure how relevant it is, but if you would like to take it, as technology is developing very fast and replacing the jobs, how to adapt and survive in accountancy profession in the long run. So it's
that's not only in accounting, everywhere.
In any profession, yes.
Everywhere. So you, me, and everybody has to struggle for that. The only way to struggle for that, as I understand, as I am trying I'm not 100% successful in that, finding your own specific location, having a wall around it, okay? And letting not to control others. Do not get involved with all big competition created by the others, because it is killing you. And when I compare, European world, especially UK society with the Sri Lankan society, UK society is very, very less competitive compared to the Sri Lankan society or a Chinese society, any other society, very, very less competitive. People now, for example, when I buy a car, nobody, my white friends around me, Carol or Daniel or anybody wouldn't ask anything about my car. When they say I bought a new car, good for you. They say what? Good for you. I don't mind. It's not for me. Good for you. So they learn how to live with what they have. Just what they have, they live it. So this society is a one good thing about this society is that less competitive. So even though I talk about the competition, even though this everybody like Google and everybody convert us into the competition, so it is your challenge not to get into that. So you have to make sure that you are living in a competition that you can manage. Only you can manage. Do not jump into anything that you can't handle. Okay. So you have to learn to say no. It's not for me. You have to learn to say in a very hard, nice, wonderful manner, in a very good sense of humor. You should be able to say mage moko. Understand? So good for you, okay? But I am here. So create your own world and handle it. Okay? That's what I don't know. Many religions would tell you. Anything else? Still you are muted.
There is one more thing. There is a comment, not a question.
Yeah.
And now I know why there is a overwhelming participation in today's session. So I think this today's session is one of the highest attended session since we started this webinar. Sir, I'm a CA student in early 2000s who love to hear your good old day stories in the CA classroom. There was a lot of takeaways from those stories. We even applied those in our lives. So do you have any of such stories to tell us today?
Oh gosh, I forgot about the stories today, because when I was teaching, glad to hear you all guys. It's very happy. I very often get some emails from various my former students. Some of them came to do PhDs and other things. That's very good. Okay? Yes, we had a wonderful good days, in IAS and in universities teaching our guys. The problem about not a problem necessarily, So the type. I don't have stories now because I am now teaching in a different world. And in this world, I have only 2 hours to teach process costing. So I go to the class, teach whole process costing, including work in progress and everything in 2 hours. Okay. In Sri Lanka, those days I had 3 extra days to teach process costing for the AAT guys. Okay. And start with a small example and do 3 or 4 such examples and then one more adjustment and extra more adjustment. So we take what? Huge number of time. Okay. And the problem about teaching is always, now teaching here is we don't lecture. For example, luckily or fortunately or unfortunately now, I don't teach the undergraduate lower level classes. I teach only the seniors. So most of the time, I don't even use the PowerPoint. I just go with a set of questions. I ask the guys, I just talk. They talk because I have a class of 30 students, especially undergraduate classes, small classes. And students talk about them. They come to the class prepared and they know exactly what to do. We put the whole questions before the lectures, and we just keep on talking. So my job is listening. All right, that's a very interesting way of looking at that one guy. Why not? What about this? I ask a question. So my job is asking questions. So I can keep the class interactive for 3 hours because they keep on talking. They keep on debating. Now in Sri Lankan environment of education, that cannot be done. So I have in IAS 600, 700 students in front of me. I have to keep on talking to them from 9 o'clock up to 5 o'clock. And any healthy human being can concentrate on a specific matter for 20 minutes. So what do we have to do? You teach the subject for 20 minutes and then tell a story for another half an hour. Keep them laughing. And then, okay, come back to the subject matter. So if you spend 8 hours teaching accounting or costing, process costing, of that 8 hours, you will actually spending 2 hours teaching the real subject. But it is necessary in that sweating, hot environment to keep the people running. You need that story. So unfortunately, sorry to say that, I don't have that much stories anymore. And the other thing is, there is no way to tell a good joke in English. How can I tell all those good jokes with the real feeling, with the real humor in English? No way. I'm not a native English speaker. I'm not a native English speaker anymore. Anyway, I will never become. So any other questions?
That's all, Professor. It was really wonderful having you with us today. Thank you very much. And I hope that we can arrange a few more sessions in the future and
Okay, yeah.
dig deep into management accounting, get into some other aspects of management accounting in future, hopefully. Thank you very much, Professor. It was wonderful having you. And to give the closing remarks, I would like to invite one of our chapter members, Gayan. Gayan, over to you.
Good afternoon to you all. I deem it is a great honor and privilege to propose the vote of thanks in this webinar. Today's event is very special because Professor Alawathage kindly accepted our sincere invitation to enlighten us on the strategizing management accounting. Let me thank you on behalf of our chapter for allocating your precious time for us and for your valuable inputs on this important subject. This was a remarkable session and we learned new aspects about strategizing management accounting. On behalf of the chapter, I would like to thank all the participants from the overseas chapter, UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Qatar. I also would like to thank our colleagues from Riyadh and Dammam who are CA members as well as others. A very big thank and heartfelt thank you to our participants from other professions, bodies, accounting, as well as other professionals from Jeddah. Moreover, I express my sincere thanks to our moderator, my colleague, Mr. Usman Hikmat, and the organizing committee headed by Mr. Nandasani Viratna, and well supported by Mr. Vajra Premaratna and Mr. Shasni Naji, who worked tirelessly behind the scenes of this organized this webinar. Finally, yet importantly, I thank you, my friends, the members of CA Sri Lanka KSA chapter attend this webinar and the support you provided to the organization committee so far. Once again, I thank you all for your kind participation. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for joining with us today. Hope to meet you all again with another session. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye. Hello. Thanks much. Well done. Thank you. Oh, much. Hold on.